I'm Erica Ricks. I have the pleasure of following Jeremy Hull, which is always some big shoes to fill. So we are here today to talk about the importance of personalization in the consumer journey. Now, depending on your brand or your product, the journey can look very different. So it can be long or short or circular or more linear. Really, our challenge as marketers is to understand consumers as individuals and understand those individual journeys. As Jeremy talked about, we are more connected than ever. So there are many different touch points and devices and even new and emerging technologies that are causing consumers to come in and out. So I am joined on stage with 4 of my colleagues, and I'll let them introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll jump into it.
Hi, I'm Matt Kelly, SVP of Consumer Journey.
Hello, I'm Janeen Sullivan, National Director of Advanced Analytics.
And I'm Alesha Romatier. I lead the cable vertical.
I'm Cashman, Vice President, Group Account Director at iProspect.
So today we're going to go through 3 core content areas. The first is consumers. Then we're going to get into data and technology, and then finally leave you with some takeaways on what we know works. So when we were talking about this panel, I came across an interesting stat, and that is by 2020, consumer experience is going to overtake price and product as the key brand differentiator. So we know that it's incredibly important to get it right, but it's not always easy to do so. So Sean, I want to start with you and tell me, why is it so difficult to get personalization right?
Yeah, it's difficult for a bunch of reasons, a lot of which have been touched base today, this morning during the sessions. To start off with technology, I mean, adoption of technology is accelerating as we speak. It's only going to continue to accelerate. So if you think about, for example, of TV, in 1950, there were 3.8 million televisions in the US. It was about 6% household penetration. It took about 5 years to get to about 30 million, which is about 60%. A couple years ago, Pokemon Go was put into the marketplace, which on the surface is a game. But when you think about it, it's a mass adaptation of a technology, AR. And it took 12 days to get to 30 million downloads. So companies that are going to win and really understand the consumer journey are the ones who understand that while they offer a product or a service, they also are a technology company at heart. Second is the impact that that's had ultimately on the consumer. Consumers are more connected, informed, and empowered than ever, and they expect more. So for example, when we talk about things like Amazon Go, that's going to impact every expectation that a consumer has when they go shopping for groceries going forward. And the companies that win are the ones that are going to understand how to harness that and be ahead of that game. And finally, I think the biggest thing for all of us in this room is something that we're probably all guilty of at one point or another, and that's living within the marketing and advertising bubble as we make decisions. So we understand that we operate in a world of constraints when we go to market. Things like organizational structures, goals for finance and return numbers that we need to hit. But at the end of the day, we're doing and making the right decisions by what we know as marketers. But very infrequently do I find that we're taking a step back and thinking about this through the lens of a consumer. Mm-hmm. We're all consumers first. Mm-hmm. So is this resonating? Is this piece of content going to do or give me the desired result? Really focusing in on that why is something that we can all do a little bit better.
So what are some ways that we can effectively enable personalization?
Yeah, and I think kind of tying to what Sean started, and I think Jeremy said something in his opening remarks, it's a C2B world. And really the start, and maybe oversimplifying it into a couple of really primary categories, planning and execution. And the first step is really starting with that consumer and deepening that understanding. And a lot of what times we see works really well is starting with a customer journey map. And so looking at that purchase path through the eyes of a customer. Like deepening that understanding in terms of their attitudes, behaviors, and feelings, and through that purchase path, what would the friction points be? And so really thinking about it through that consumer lens. And so it's a really good strategic planning and tool to kind of prioritize your efforts. And so you start with the consumer, and once you have that, you can kind of start to overlay your marketing efforts. What are my brand differentiators? What are the product attributes that would be aligned to this consumer's needs? And then take that even further, and your marketing plans and your media strategies of what are the resonant messages at each point? What are the media channel? What's the media channel mix in terms of how am I going to best target those consumers? And so it may sound a little esoteric, and we see a lot of brands we work with and organizations we work with, they do that to varying degrees, but sometimes it gets shorted. And I think we're all kind of, as marketers, we're managing this giant marketing ecosystem, and we've got budgets, we have media plans, we have to create ad units, we've got to version things, and you kind of start to feed the machine. at the expense of basically understanding the consumer. And so if you really start with that consumer framework and align your marketing activities to that, I think you basically will see it, take it a lot further in terms of kind of driving that experience and that relevancy with the consumer. And the other thing is really in the measurement strategy, as marketers, we always think about ROI or marketer metrics, and maybe that ends up being a cost per acquisition, total acquisitions, lifetime value, but you also need to be thinking about customer metrics. And so things like net promoter scores, satisfaction surveys, things of that sort. Like, that's not things that you're going to leverage on a day-to-day basis to kind of optimize your media marketing efforts, but you want to align both of those to basically understand how they're working together and are you moving the needle. And so from a planning standpoint, journey mapping, aligning your marketing plans and activities, and having a really robust measurement strategy are kind of those key tenets. And then when you get into the execution and enablement, kind of a master in stating the obvious, and we talked about that, but data connectivity is huge. And so as you've mapped out those consumer touch points, like, do you have the data? Is the data accessible and available to glean insights and drive those optimizations? Very closely tied to that is your technology. So, we talked about that this morning. Technology is really just the tool, but do you have your ad tech stacks and MarTech stacks to basically kind of enable to drive the machine? So you have those things set up. And last but not least, and I think we've hit on it this morning as well, is the organizational structure at brands. Like, in most instances, they're kind of subject matter expert areas. Maybe it's media, e-commerce, call center, retail. And you need that. You need those experts to basically kind of refine and optimize those specific areas. But you really need an organization that has that holistic vision and understanding of that consumer purchase path. That basically provides that guide or that beacon for everybody to kind of align to. And so within my specific area that I'm trying to influence, what is my part to play? Where is someone coming from? What do I need to do? And how do I make that experience more relevant and kind of pass them to the next stage? And so those are some of the the things that you need to employ for personalization, but also some of the challenges that I think we're all kind of dealing with.
Yeah. So Gerd talked about, we know data is incredibly powerful, and we're capturing all of this first-party data. I think it needs to be done in an ethical way, as he was talking about, and I think gathering that much information really opens the door for some missteps. So what are some examples of where personalization has either gone wrong or has not been used in the right way that's meaningful for a customer?
Yeah. I can certainly think of a lot of personal examples where personalization has gone wrong. I suspect a few people in the room can as well. Probably one of the most public examples that I can think of, and admittedly it was a couple years ago, but it's kind of a dramatic illustration, and a good illustration is Target, which has a robust amount of data, and apparently some very innovative analysts did a remarkable job of identifying about 25 products that when used in some kind of combination and when analyzed, they were able to actually assign a pregnancy prediction score. And maybe more impressive, they were actually able to estimate a due date within a pretty impressive short window of time. And this allowed them to send email messaging with coupons that were relevant to different stages of pregnancy, which is really cool, right? Flash forward a few weeks later, an irate father shows up at his local Target store, is very unhappy that Target's been sending his teenage daughter emails with coupons for baby clothes and cribs and so on and so forth. I'm sure there was a very befuddled Target general manager that didn't know what was going on, but Target corporate called him a few days later to apologize, I'm sure to do some damage control, and he very sheepishly admitted that indeed his teenage daughter was pregnant. He and his wife did not know about it. And, egg on Target's face to some degree. But this is an example of really powerful data, really innovative analytics, but it seems like the key missing ingredient here was something pretty simple and straightforward as important demographic information.
Yeah.
How old was this young girl? She lived at home. So,
some basics.
Yeah, some basics.
So from your perspective, how do you think that could have been avoided?
Well, certainly making sure technology is in place. Right?
Birth control.
That's a very loaded question.
Fair point, Matt. Not to put too fine a point on it, but I think it's really important for brands to make sure their data house is in order.
Yep.
It's one thing to have the technology in place, but I'm continually surprised how frequently folks want to run into personalization and not go through the due diligence of understanding what data do they have at their disposal, how old is the data, what are the gaps in the data, are they working with partners and they're using their second-party data, and if so, what's their comfort with the veracity of that data?
Yeah.
It's admittedly not the most exciting part of personalization, but this is a place where you can really rely on partners to help you with this. In my opinion, it is the most critical step in making certain that you're poised to do this successfully.
Yeah.
Right, it's not only the availability of data, right, but it's knowing when and how to use it.
Completely.
So avid Amazon shopper at the Cashman household, every 2 days it's like Christmas morning. We don't know what's going to arrive, but we know it's going to be there. And we have a Prime account that we share in our household, but it's separation of church and state, partially for survival of the marriage and all that stuff. But about a year ago, I started to get remarketed to based on what was in my wife's cart. Amazing. My batting average for gifts shot right up. When she got her, I like long walks down every aisle at Target mug, I was a hero. But I also haven't been surprised by a gift that she's gotten me since 2016.
Yeah.
So it's a function of when to use it, how to use it, and is it really relevant to the individual? They knew we were connected, they just weren't quite sure how.
Yeah. But also, is it a way that the consumer is willing to be engaged? And I think that's part of what Gerd was talking about too, in terms of, there's all this data. Some of it is an indicator of a behavior, some of it isn't. But to what degree are consumers willing to be personalized too? And how do we create the experience that compels them to want more of that in a respectful way, right?
Yeah. So moving into data and technology, another stat I came across, and this is probably outdated at this point, even though it's only a few months old, 41% of adults are using voice search at least once a day. So we know with AI, that coming up more and voice search being used more and more, all these new technologies are disrupting the journey. So what should brands really think about as they sort of plan for the next disruption? And if you can talk a little bit about
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, so search is interesting because as marketers, we're often thinking about what is the message we want to push into the environment via display or paid social or broadcast. And search has always been a place where a consumer is asking the question, right? And technology is delivering the response. Voice search takes it to a whole nother level because now it is actually that kind of proverbial conversation from which we can glean so much information about how a consumer wants to be engaged with, what might be a key decision point for them, what intent they have, what behavior they have. And if we're smart and we have connected the data, as Matt says, and we understand how to interpret what they're putting into the search engine and what they're offering up as a part of that conversation, then we can map all of the scenarios to help drive the behavior that we're looking for. And so if you're thinking about how do I get ahead of this and what should I be doing, it really starts with getting your data house in order and understanding how even today's sort of non-voice binary search activity happens. What does that mean for your consumers? And then placing all of the right pieces along the consumer journey path to evolve it against those indicators from search. And then you have to test all the time, always on testing, so that you really understand, okay, I think because they searched in this way, because they search based on who has the best price, I think they're going to be driven by a price message. So I'm going to carry that through, and I'm going to carry it through all the way to the conversion, and perhaps beyond when we're talking about upselling them and maintaining that relationship going forward.
Some of the new technologies are creating they're creating conversations, and that's going to force personalization, and so you have to kind of stay a step ahead of that, totally.
And voice, as you were kind of saying to that vein, it's really not a channel, right? It's a behavior. You're having an ongoing conversation. There's literally no barrier to entry unless you can't speak. So it'll be interesting to see what impact it has across other channels throughout the entire journey. Hopefully we live in a world where nobody's looking down on their phone anymore while they're driving, because voice is going to be so ingrained into everything that we do.
Because we all have small children, and we were talking about that, and your 2-year-old Alexa understands her squeaky voice.
Yeah.
That's going to be ingrained in terms of what their expectations are.
Yeah. So this is probably going to be a common theme that comes up, but we know that there's a crackdown on first-party data, and there's some controversies around it, and some walled gardens are going to be built a little bit higher and higher. So, really, what can advertisers anticipate when it comes to all-party data? Janeen, if you could give me your thoughts on that.
It's actually it's very timely for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is we're looking at a deadline the end of this week where we need to navigate purging third-party data from the EU, and there's been some nerves on my team about that. And and we admittedly, much like Jeremy said this morning, we don't know everything. We don't know how that's going to manifest itself in the US, but I think everybody here can agree it's safe to say we need to prepare. And we need to be creative. Again, going back to being mindful of what data brands already have about their customers, they really need to start taking a very hard look at how are they collecting first-party data, what are they doing with it, are they being mindful of how old it is. I, for one, think an oft-overlooked opportunity is the whole customer service experience. And granted, that's a little arduous because it's so manual and so hands-on. It's also arduous because oftentimes the customer may be coming to you because they're having a negative experience. But if you can resolve that issue and collect new data, refine data, that could be a very powerful tool and possibly something that brands might want to start looking at investing resources, money, whatever the case may be. The other is really starting to think hard about what would be beneficial partnerships so they can start building second-party data. I think the really important thing to be mindful of there is, are you comfortable with what the expectation is of how you're sharing your data, what data you're sharing, and also, do you feel confident that there's veracity and thoroughness that the partner is applying in making sure that that data is accurate and all the things that are important. So.
Yeah, that actually leads into a question for you, Matt. So Gert actually nodded to this, that 98% of all data is unorganized and only 1% is analyzed. So how do you dig through the clutter to figure out what are those most important pieces?
I think the other piece to that is, it may be unstructured, but also is it really tied to the business objective of what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah.
So I think that other piece is that, if you, again, sound like a broken record going back to like the journey mapping and linking kind of your marketing and media plans to that, but if you've taken that step, you know what's important, you know what those crucial metrics are at each stage, and so you've plotted that out. And a lot of times, the granularity of the data, there's challenges of, clickstream data is fantastic, but, someone goes offline to the call center, someone goes into a retail outlet, that can be more challenging, but just, there are solutions. There's partners, obviously, Google and others are kind of helping to figure that out. But if there are gaps, what are there ways to kind of have directional solutions? And so, maybe the granularity is not there, but you're getting kind of directional insights, you're doing surveys, you're getting qualitative understanding. And so, no, it's never perfect, but just making sure you're kind of delivering that intelligence across. Because I think that's the one thing is like if you really set that structure, it provides the guardrails against you kind of like there's a lot of data out there, but is it really that meaningful?
Yeah.
It helps to kind of keep your eye on the ball in terms of like if you're trying to optimize an experience, like what is important to me?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's also a boil the ocean sort of
Yes,
tendency,
absolutely.
and I think pragmatism is always best in terms of trying to adapt sort of a crawl, walk, run methodology of, okay, let's slice and dice it into 5 components first and see if we can affect change there. And if that works, then take the most valuable one and slice that another 2 ways, and to the KPIs. But the tendency to want to go huge right away is often a dangerous place to go.
And also, I mean, you think about the categories we're working in. Some of these products are not, there can be commodities. And so we need to think about that as well, is like you don't want to overthink it. You may not have brand differentiation points or things that are really relevant to consumer, but you have product attributes that basically meet their need. And so again, I think if you just refine it down to that you don't get lost in terms of like the mountains of data that are at your fingertips.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you use data to identify any barriers or challenges in the journey? And then a secondary question on top of that is then how do you use media in order to eliminate it?
Yeah, well, so, you know, for me in the cable space, it's an interesting conundrum because 50% of our conversions happen in a call center. And we've tried a lot of things across all of the different cable providers to try to route those consumers back online. But there's a real strong feeling of the need to want to call in. And so when we think about, and this applies to not just cable, but when we think about, you know, where are the barriers and how do we overcome them, you really have to think holistically. Mm-hmm. Digital is amazing because you can see everything that consumers do. But we sometimes forget about all the things that we can't see. And there are technologies and creative ways to try to pull that in. So don't just think about what happens online. In my case, think about what happens in the call centers. My call center agents are like mini focus groups. They can tell me at any given time, is the site broken? Is the site down? Did we just make a major change to pricing and consumers are very unhappy about that? What's the right sort of messaging to get them around it? Also, just why are they choosing to call? Is it because they couldn't answer a burning question about what channels they're going to get? And that gives us valuable information about not just the media that's driving the conversion, and that is very valuable, understanding how different media components contribute at different times of the purchase journey, right? Non-brand, for instance, tends to drive a ton of call center traffic, and nobody buys because they're researching, right? Mm-hmm. It also gives me a ton of information that I can then use to optimize my site and allows me to understand what's going on in the call center. You know, I think there's a tendency because of the silos to just sort of try to work right here. Yeah. But as much as we can, take a page from the gentleman from Amazon and try to think more holistically and leverage technology. The other place, sorry, is in store, where those of you that have, you know, stores, the technology isn't fully evolved to get the same sort of data I can get out of my call centers, but you have the staff that's working there. Yeah. You can figure out a way to have a focus group, get in the same room with them, and understand, you know, what are consumers saying as they're engaging directly with your product.
I'm appreciative of that comment because when I think about the work that our data scientists are doing right now, some of the most valuable insights are coming out of offline, in-store behaviors. Yeah. So that's a really critical point.
Yeah. Well, I think for us, it's just back to the media. We would have defunded tons of media if we were only looking at online conversion. We would have really shot ourselves in the foot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now we're able to really tell that holistic story across the board.
Yeah.
It's important when looking through media, right? Like the consumer doesn't look at you as online and offline. They look at you as brand. So are they, you know, there has to be a very specific reason for someone to be relatively inconvenienced and go in store, whether they want that personalized experience, they're looking for advice, whatever it is, to harness that and to bring that through the entire journey based on what you're hearing, all the signals, online, in store, is critical to make the entire experience resonate with who you're trying to reach.
Yeah. So that actually leads into a good question. So, you know, we know that the use of data, it can be very difficult to use it in a way that's really helpful in enhancing that consumer experience. So I'd love for you guys to share some examples of brands that you think are using data in a way that really does provide that helpful, authentic experience that really elevates the brand in your eyes.
Well, there's a couple. I mean, I think that we mentioned a couple even today. Netflix, I mean, I get to watch shows I would have never even thought about watching because they know me better than I know myself, apparently. But one example of a company that gets a lot of press for doing this right is a company that we watch because of our partnership with Wolverine, and that's Zappos. Zappos, there's plenty of instances where they ultimately unpack every touch point and understand that every touch point is an opportunity. So whether it's getting press for sending a pair of shoes to a groom whose shoes got lost in the mail, or I think there was a PR move where they sponsored a portion of the Massachusetts Turnpike on Thanksgiving so no one had to pay tolls. They kind of just get it. Yeah. And there's a really good example that I want to share today about what could be a simple interaction, but it actually shows something a little bit bigger. So on the surface, this kind of interaction is just smile-inducing, right?
Yeah.
But that is a perfect example of understanding that every interaction is an opportunity. All we have to do is understand how our target market wants to be communicated with, what's important to them, and bring that to life in every interaction. I say that's all that we have to do. It's a very difficult thing to do, but it really comes with a mentality of being customer first. We all say it, but actually making that sing throughout the entire customer journey is what's going to happen if you want to win.
And just in action, I mean, they're creating a conversation. You know, you're kind of solving the problem, and that's a weird example, but a really good one. I think we obviously see, like, and we've known working with organizations, like a lot of times those reps don't have the autonomy to do that, and they're scripted, and they're, you know, a question comes in, they're pressing a button, you know, that, this is like 70% of what the answer might need to be. Like that can go wrong, but when you do that, that's when you basically create brand evangelists. The experience is that much better. So it's a really good example.
Right, that person could have just gone right back to the script, but saw an opportunity and took it.
And I've got maybe a personal example, kind of down that same road.
Not Target.
Not Target.
That personal.
I'm done on that front. I hate shopping. I can't stand it. It creates anxiety. But online was seeing some messaging from Bonobos, and very interesting in that it's not, you know, around, hey, it's hot, buy some tank tops and shorts, and visual image, I don't wear tank tops, so don't worry about that. But it really, you know, it's, for me, it was like, okay, it looks like it's very, the product looks very simple and classic, and it seemed like it's like the experience in terms of like packing, what you need to pack, or if you're going on vacation, it like really resonated with me. So I you know, went to the site, very well laid out, very simple, and as a guy, you want selection, but you don't want that much selection, so it was very easy to navigate. You know, a lot of these things they're doing are not unique to Bonobos, but easy ways to kind of understand fit and what it would look like on you, and they have what they call their ninjas if you have a question, and I did the same thing and asking about, you know, fit of the clothes. So it was a great experience, and kind of finished that up, and then I'm like, oh, the price. I'm also cheap. And so I'm just like, yeah, this is way out of my price range. And so I go to abandon, hey, guess what? You're a new customer, 30% off. Okay, so, okay, I got you. So they got me, and I made that purchase. You get the box in 2 days, you try it on, it's easy to send back. But really what I found is now as I get that ongoing contact strategy, I get the emails, like I typically look at them, and I'm not buying clothes on a weekly basis, but it just interests me in what they're doing. And a couple of weeks ago, I needed to buy some clothes. We were going on vacation. I actually purchased at full price. And so after the fact, it's a big thing.
Whoa.
But it really hit me after the fact, because people were talking about what are your favorite experiences or what are really good experiences. I hadn't thought about that, but like the experience basically outweighed my price sensitivity or my cheapness. And so it was, and I'm.
But it was also trust, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, through every touch point, through all of the content, you got to trust them.
It was very seamless, absolutely.
Regardless of the exorbitant price, you were able to trust the brand that they were doing what's right for you, which is great.
And may I add that you look dashing.
Thank you. And actually, you will see in the next couple of days, it's a variation of what I'm wearing today. So it's not going to change that much.
You know, actually, there's commonality in your Bonobos example and Zappos, and I'm thinking about what you said about a tendency to want to boil the ocean and not being mindful of this kind of like crawl, walk, run. But it was, both Zappos and Bonobos have been on my radar for some time as a digital marketer, that they've been growing into this. They were at the forefront. So it's not surprising to me that we're using these two examples. And I think this is an intimidating thing to go into, and a brand may think that they need to be performing at the level that a Zappos or as a Bonobos is, but it's not necessary. It's like, try some things, see how it works.
The basics.
Yeah.
So obviously, as marketers, we want to have a Matt campaign and an Alesha campaign and a Janeen campaign. It's not realistic. So how do we achieve personalization at scale?
Yeah, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Yeah, and it's not about like really good segmentation. I mean, this is about hyper-personalization. It's about a one-on-one conversation, and it's not for the faint of heart because it's really, really hard to do.
Yeah.
And this may seem like an oversimplification, but first and foremost, you have to start off with strategy. When we approach this from an iProspect point of view, we're engaging the strategy team, the communications planning team, to make sure that we're taking into consideration what everything out there in the landscape looks like and putting together a solid strategy. And then as we get into activating on that strategy, collecting data, refining the data, I think first and foremost, despite the slippery slope that I mentioned earlier about machine learning and artificial intelligence, that maybe over-automation can be a bad thing, it's absolutely one of the most powerful tools in our arsenal. And when you combine artificial intelligence with data gathering, you're able to really create millions, maybe billions, I'd have to ask my data science team, potential creative or customer experiences. And really understand that fluid cross-channel, cross-device journey. So, some techniques or some tools that I know, Netflix, Etsy, one of the things that I'm hearing about is collaborative filtering. And that is, yes, we're personalizing, but we can also understand collective behaviors to create efficiencies in customer experiences on site. But the really important thing about that is it's not a static thing. As the information comes in, as the data comes in, that has to evolve. We have to refine it. Another tool that I know I'm hearing a lot about is image recognition, and it's allowing brands to go through hundreds of thousands of images from social media to understand context and sentiment, and to understand how products are being used, where, in conjunction with what other things. Is somebody eating ice cream at the gym or watching Netflix with their cat, whatever the case may be. I mean, it's really, really powerful information. But I think the most important thing that a brand needs to consider is leveraging a planning and activation platform like M1 that helps utilize audience information in a responsible, secure manner in addressable and programmatic media. It's important, though, when you're thinking about this and you're thinking about platforms, that you feel confident that the platform is being mindful of all aspects of that. I mean, yes, we need to identify the consumer in a very accurate way. We also need to make certain that the data sources that we're considering or that we're utilizing are robust, that they're considering a lot of attributes, and that the final part of that is there's got to be a way to disseminate that to the media. So,
I think I'm going to disagree with you just a little bit.
By all means.
Well, which is when I think about where we have been successful in the cable space, it's been kind of reverse engineering it. And so leveraging machine learning, leveraging all of the information that we knew from why people were converting and where they were converting. And instead of getting our heads in a pretzel around all the different Nielsen segments and how, I sell cable. It's a commodity, everybody needs it, right? And so is there really a difference in how a Silver Surfer searches for and purchases cable versus an iMom, right? Maybe, maybe not. So what we did was, instead, to think about using the data that we had, how do people come to the decision? What are the drivers in deciding what kind of cable you want to buy and what tier of package you want to buy? And we ultimately landed on, there are price shoppers, there are value shoppers, there are benefits shoppers, and those sort of went into two categories, right? People that were really engaged around the speed of their internet and the number of devices that they could have online and what that was going to deliver from them from a functionality perspective, and content junkies, right? People who were mostly interested in the benefits of all the TV stations. And so what we did was, instead of 16 different creative versions where you've got a silver-haired guy buying cable and a teenager buying cable, we really created an end-to-end strategy around a values-based message. And that's extended from the top of the funnel all the way through. And as we saw consumers engage with that, we were able to use machine learning to back into the variables that tied them together as a group. And then that gave us a really good understanding of the fact that, in some cases, you might have a senior citizen who approaches buying cable the exact same way as a sophomore in college who's moving into their apartment. They're both on fixed incomes. They're both relatively unsophisticated about, bandwidth. And that was all it was. So I think for those of you that get caught up in the, like, I'm going to have to pay my agency for so many different variations of creative, I'm going to have to think about, like, how do I deliver all of those? There are ways to be creative, to put it, backwards a little bit.
Great.
So are there any other examples where iProspect is helping our clients really deliver that hyper-personalized, strategic approach?
I mean, I think maybe like backing it up a little bit in terms of what makes a really good, from my perspective, I think we'd all agree, agency and brand partnership. I think Jeremy hit it a little bit this morning too, is like success for us is basically we're seen as a trusted extension of the brand's marketing team. And so it's a push-pull relationship. And sometimes that can be, there's a little bit of this, but that's healthy. And I think the biggest thing in terms of like the expectations, I think on the agency side is we may be scoped for something specific. Maybe it is we're managing all of your digital media, but the more the brands share that broader construct of like the business objectives, the challenges, the priorities, that we have that holistic understanding, that will basically influence, because we want to basically deliver performance, we want to deliver thought leadership, and take us out of our silo as well, and let us be more of that partner. And I think a lot of the things we talked about this morning is if there's a gap that we can fill. We've all talked about how personalized marketing is really challenging, and so whether it is you're lacking in consumer intelligence, can we help with partner on delivering some research? We talked about journey mapping. We can work with your teams and audit the customer research and the data that's there available, is available, and work with your teams and workshop and basically set that up. One of the things is, in the labs tomorrow is if there's a need to connect those dots from specific touch points, and so media through to dynamic landing pages and digital experiences, like with LFX, those are things that we can bring to the table. And a lot of times we're even seeing it's just pure data connectivity. Stitching the data together so it's all in one place so you can glean those insights and have it at your fingertips, and Janeen and I were talking like advanced analytics, helping in those areas. And so I kind of ran down a laundry list, but it really speaks to bringing us in and seeing us as partners and wanting to kind of help and kind of deliver those solutions to just bring us in and provide us the context.
Yeah, I think further to that, one of the places where I think we can really be helpful is that if you're in your organization and you're having trouble breaking down the silos, and you know that there is data that resides somewhere, but that silo is, competing with yours, and they may not want to partner with you, we've had a lot of success sort of building the business case and going in and helping to present that with you so that we really are able to anchor back to this isn't about channel conflict or, silos. It's really about what's the best thing for your organization in terms of building the best relationship with the clients and the consumers, and also building the best experience and ultimately business outcomes for you. So I know that's one where Matt and I have on a number of occasions sort of gone in and met with, on behalf of the digital teams, gone in and met with, call center teams or retail teams and sort of unpacked like, what is the mutual benefit of all of this, and how do we do it in a way where it's not about losing credit, it's about getting more for everybody.
Absolutely. So we only have a couple more minutes. I don't know if there's any questions through the app or questions from the audience.
No.
Don't think so.
Maybe not.
Did we do our job so well?
We covered everything. Thank you guys so much for joining me. It was a great conversation. I appreciate everybody contributing and you being such an intent and thoughtful audience. So thank you guys.
Thank you.